The excitement's good, just give us a little more space.
All this hacking's too much for me.
Happy New Year and welcome to the Hackaday podcast. I'm Elliot Williams, editor-in-chief of Hackaday.
And I'm Tom Nardi, managing editor.
This is episode 150. Today we find out that Blackberries have run out of juice, Node has all your pinouts, rats can learn Doom, and 2021 is done. In the news this week, we heard that Blackberry will run out of juice on January 4th. It looks like they're closing down all of their services, and people with their devices are shedding a tear or two.
This is one of those things where I bet if you asked the average person, they probably thought, BlackBerry had already wound down operations.
They'd said they were going to a few years ago, right?
Yeah.
So,
definitely.
I mean, it's not a total surprise that Blackberry is one foot in the grave, but this may be the other one.
It's a bit like hearing, Palm Pilot finally gave up the ghost. I mean, when's the last time you saw one in the wild, right?
Correct. Yeah, but a lot of people really love the devices, and I think what's telling about this is that basically everybody cites the physical keyboard as being the reason they love them most. I mean, I guess Blackberries were kind of like smartphones before smartphones in a way. I do have to say, having a tactile keyboard like that really does help if what you're doing is like typing SMSs or filling in forms on websites or whatever. The little like swing up on the screen keyboard never really cuts it for me.
No. And I mean, they were email monsters, They had a little scroll wheel on the side so you could tear through the inbox real quick. I mean, they were definitely built for purpose and they worked very well for that, But they kind of predate the idea of, mobile web browsing. It was just to fire off emails as fast as possible.
I think what's also notable is that we've seen some hacks reusing the BlackBerry keyboards just because they're such nice hardware, little tiny keyboards. I know Arturo's done one that's really awesome. That's over on Hackaday.io. I'll have to dig up a link and throw it in the show notes. Shout out to Arturo182, who is always listening to the podcast and makes an awesome adapter so that you can reuse old BlackBerry keyboards for your projects.
Yeah, I mean, who can even imagine the amount of new old stock of these things that are laying around, right? So
yeah.
They're already made. They already work really well. Why not put them to use? I mean, it's interesting that the keyboard itself will outlive the actual device. So there could be a time in the future, not even so far in the future, where somebody's using a hacked together device with a BlackBerry keyboard that never had heard of a BlackBerry originally.
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
Hey, and welcome to What's That Sound? The first What's That Sound of 2022. I've got a sound for you this week that is from a story that's run on Hackaday in the last few days. So that's a little bit of a clue, and I think it's necessary because it's kind of a hard one. Have a listen, Tom.
I mean, my gut feel is like a teletype or something.
Mm-hmm.
Something more specific than that, I guess you're looking for, right?
It's machiney, but it's not a teletype.
Maybe. I think I might. Maybe I might know it. Well, you'll bleep me out if I get it right.
Absolutely.
Is it some kind of?
It is. Damn it! You got it. Congratulations,
well, you know what?
Tom.
I don't. You bleep out the hint too.
Yeah, exactly.
Only because you said that we wrote something recently about it.
Well, good job, Tom. And if you're out there listening and you also know what it is, be sure to head over to the podcast page and fill out the web form you'll find there. Give us an email address and the name that you'd like to be called on the podcast. And if we draw your name from among the correct answers, you will get the coveted Hackaday t-shirt.
It occurs to me, I don't think I've ever seen what the podcast, or is that part of the mystique?
You haven't seen the Hackaday podcast t-shirt?
No. I don't think anyone has, right? Unless they've received one. It certainly hasn't been on the site.
Dude, that's probably true. It's just, it's a black t-shirt with the Hackaday podcast microphone logo on it.
Well, that's cool. That's cool. But yeah, they're so rare they haven't been seen in the wild.
So rare, I don't think I certainly haven't seen one in real life. All right, let's start up some hacks. And this week I'd like to start off with one that is deceptively simple in a way. Its modular design enables huge ping pong ball LED displays. And this is a hack that David put up on Hackaday.io. Ping pong balls make these like fantastic LED diffusers. And so putting them on top of LEDs is kind of a no-brainer. Except they're round. I mean, they're spherical, and you got to figure out how to attach them. So the first part of this project is actually just a really nice looking 3D printed spherical cutout that the ping pong ball can nicely nestle in. And it's got a little hole for these kind of 50-50 style WS2812 equivalent LEDs. The ones David's using are the ones that are on little aluminum heat sinks for you. So you can buy like a big pack of them and you just break them off. And he fits them nicely into a 3D print that then the ping pong ball sits on top of. That's already pretty good. But then his next step is to make an array of these. And so he makes a 3D printed matrix in 5x5 chunks of these that then he can assemble all the LEDs in, glue the ping pong balls on top. And then the individual 5x5s, of course, all connect together as well. So what this does is this makes the spacing between the LEDs absolutely consistent and perfect to like just fit the ping pong balls. And that alone is pretty darn cool. But the other thing that he does in this that is a trick I've never seen before, and I kind of want to talk about for a sec, he has these long runs of wire that he needs to strip at particular intervals. And he's got so many of these because it's a big LED array. What he does is he tapes them down to a piece of cardboard and puts them in the laser cutter and etches away the insulation in the places that he wants to solder to the LEDs. So what he gets is like a long-ish wire with the insulation eaten away at a couple strategic locations along the way so that you just lay it down over the LED matrix and tack, solder it on. I think that's really clever. Why have I never seen this before?
Yeah, right? I was hoping you were going to bring that up because I thought that really stood out, that little trick. And it does make perfect sense for this kind of thing. You know, knocked the pattern out so you don't have to keep doing it by hand. As someone who's actually had to wire these, you know, for a project, like piece by piece, it sucks. So like the idea of you could have all the wires already stripped and size is such a time saver.
Well, and there's all these projects you might do like this where you have a matrix of whatever. Like I did something like this, except with wire strippers and like woodgieing the insulation down the wire manually myself for a hand-wired DIY keyboard that I made.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So the one I type on, it's the easiest way to do it. You need insulation between the key switches, but it needs to solder to each of them. But like anything that you need a matrix of, like big LED arrays with, you know, regular LEDs as well as this kind of thing where you've got them in a frame. I do wonder if the insulation isn't vinyl containing, which is one of those things that's a total no-no for laser cutting because it gives off chlorine gas and can be kind of corrosive to the optics and, you know, well, also corrosive to your lungs if you get enough of it in there. So that's my only caveat if you're thinking of copying this at home, is that it maybe you want to test the wire you're using before you do it. But other than that, it looks absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, you know, I have a vague recollection that we're talking about it of somebody doing a hand-wired keyboard, and I think they did something similar, but they burned the insulation with a little torch for each switch, which is, you know, okay, fine. That's that's the MacGyver way of doing it, but yeah, this is a much more orderly approach. And you don't have liquid plastic dripping everywhere.
If you do it with enamel wire, I guess it's kind of meant to go away in flames, right? So you could totally do it with like like magnet winding wire or something. That would make sense. Anyway, it's just such a cool technique. Of course, the LED matrix that comes out of this is just like you'd expect. It's a high precision, lots of ping pong diffusers, color RGB LED matrix. That alone is pretty awesome. And he's only got it running on low power now, which is only a couple amps. But when he gets his higher power supply set up, David's planning to run it on a 60 amp power supply. That's a lot of lights.
We don't have them as much, but we do occasionally still see the desktop 3D printer haters. And like, this is a perfect example. It's like, I defy you to figure out how to do this with hand tools, like making his little framework that snaps together.
Yeah.
Like, it's a perfect application for a machine that can crank out infinite copies of something.
Yeah. And this is perfect for a couple machines, right? Like, this is this is the bifecta. It's got the laser cutter used for doing the wires, which is a totally bizarre off-label use. And then it's got the 3D printer printing out the grids. I guess all it needs is some kind of CNC machined frame. Like, he needs like a big old CNC router to make some kind of wooden frame for the thing.
You got to do like a pick and place for each little ping pong ball. Because you got to put a little hot glue in the cup and then drop it in place. I'm sure you can make a tool changer or something for that.
Hot glue robot.
Yeah, you're right. Hey, hot glue robot. Yeah, throw it all down and then you just drop them with a pick and place.
Yeah, but this is a truly modern project, and it's full of lots of little tips and tricks that you could use in your own projects.
This one's going back a few days, right around Christmas, but since we didn't do a podcast, we'll talk about it now. Node, the enigmatic hacker that we only hear from, once or twice a year, worked on a project with his friend Baptiste called the Pinouts Book, which is, a book of pinouts, right? Like, it does what it says on the box. Of course, you can get pinouts anywhere, right? You can search online, you can find data sheets, but the idea of this is to kind of be just the one-stop shop. It's hundreds of modules and boards and connectors that we kind of run into. It's not the end all be all. It's the list of stuff that the average maker and hacker might be fiddling with, and everything is presented in a very straightforward, kind of streamlined way. The art I really like. A lot of the comments were talking about that too. It's like a very simplistic, almost like a vector kind of thing. White on black. You get the idea. There's no detail you don't need. It's just the shape of the board and the pinouts. And then on the other side of the book is just a simple little spreadsheet kind of thing. The idea originally was to print it, and it sounds like that might still be in the cards, but it got to the point where it was so big, and they realized, navigating it in print would be kind of tricky, that they said that releasing it digitally was probably the most reasonable approach, especially for a first release. It gives them a chance to, fix any issues and that sort of thing. I did think it was funny in the comments. Some people were complaining about the color scheme, and they're like, "Oh, all this white text on black background. I hate it." And I felt like that little meme. I was like, "Oh, we're in trouble," because
yeah, right.
If you don't like the color scheme of this book, I got a whole website you're gonna hate.
Happens to match one of my favorite websites out there that also has a very similar. Yeah, no, it's just beautiful art, and it's kind of simple and refined, and like you say, I don't know if you need a Pinouts collection book to be beautiful. You really just want the pinouts that you want to know, which pin goes where on the devices I'm used to using. Right. But for that, it's exactly, you hammered it. It's written by hackers for hackers. It's exactly the kinds of things that you want to find. And so it's just it's icing on the cake that it's eye candy too. It does make you wish that it was out in print, though, even though it might be less accessible. Like, this would be a rad coffee table book. I would definitely put a copy on our coffee table.
And Node has done a few books already, so it's not like it's they know what the expectation is. So I think that given some time to knock the bugs out, and they're probably going to come back with a physical release at some point. Just in the comments, you had so many people asking for it, and I think too, there's a lot of holdovers in the book from the concept of it being like, you know, some people were commenting there's no clickable links or anything, which, you know, it's kind of like for an ebook is a little bit weird, but I think that's all kind of a holdover from the idea that this is going to get printed at some point.
Oh, I hope it does. I think that'd be awesome. But, you know, super thankful that they released it anyway.
Absolutely. And for free. Did we mention that? It's free.
Yeah.
This incredible resource is free as a PDF. No DRM or anything. It's Creative Commons. And you can put it on your phone, your tablet, as many computers as you want, and always have it there. He said if you want to support the project, you can buy a shirt, actually. You cannot buy it at any price, but you can buy a shirt that has the artwork on it, which actually is pretty cool, too.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I did like that. If you're going to merchandise it, that's the best way to do it, right?
Well, looking forward to seeing people walking around wearing this t-shirt in the wild pretty soon. All right, from 2 very useful hacks to one that is kind of a little bit of a niche case. Rats learn to play Doom in this automated VR arena. This is a research project by Victor Toth toward getting an automatic platform to train rats to move around in a VR world. Now, why would you want to do this? Well, rats are an extremely popular research animal in basically every area of science, but especially for neuroscientists who are interested in brain activity. So having them able to move through realistic environments and seeing what's going on in their heads is important. But that means you have to train the rats first. And training rats is extraordinarily human intensive. And the idea here is that maybe they can train rats using VR stuff to then, you know, bridge these behaviors over into the real world and do the experiments on them. But that's not the cool part. The cool part is that he's got this rat with a suit that suspends it over basically a super large trackball. It's like an inverted mouse ball, but it's, you know, the rat on top. And it has ball mouse sensors on it, so it can tell when the rat moves and rolls the ball. But it's also got motors, so it can drive the rat to give it suggestions about going forward. And the rat is face up to a really big monitor. He's got a harness, he's got a sugar water reward coming out of a tube in front of him. And the idea is to train him to play the most minimal level of Doom ever. It's a hallway and a door at the end, and then you press the button to get out. But if you can train a rat even to do that and kind of, you know, think that he's inside the video game, you've done something that is pretty impressive, costs a lot of money in either human researcher time to train the rats or in incredibly expensive apparatus to do the training for you. It's really fun to watch how the training goes because you could see the rat kind of stalled, and then the ball will move it forward a little bit, and then the rat gets a little sugar water. And then the rat, by the end, is like hauling along down that hallway, just slurping up the sugar water.
I wish I had a similar mechanism for sugar water while I'm playing Doom.
Yeah, right? Well, that's a good idea.
Is it limited to rats? Can humans use this too?
Every time you get out one of those doors at the end, you can have it dispense you a new beverage.
So if I can toot our own horn here for a little bit, this is one of those cases where, you know, we talked about it in our little meeting. I had already seen it on kind of like the, you know, the mainstream quote unquote sites, and it didn't seem very interesting to me, frankly. But when Dan kind of went into it and brought some of the more of that detail to light, I realized how much of our stuff, for lack of a better word, was involved. I assumed, you know, from the headlines and the very kind of like meme coverage from the other sites that this was some kind of white paper thing that was, you know, done at a research lab and we were only going to get the, you know, the headlines. But no, I mean, it's all, the whole thing's broken down. It's built with, you know, aluminum extrusion and off the shelf kind of parts. Like, this is something that, if you were so inclined, you could definitely replicate, you know. I mean, I like the part where he even says, instead of doing like a projector or whatever, they just got like a curved monitor, like just like an off-the-shelf computer monitor, because they just figured that would give like the rat a better field of view kind of thing. So I think it's a good example of digging a little deeper into these stories and finding those points that make it one of our stories and not just, some little blip on the radar.
Yeah, exactly. And I think science labs I actually grew up in kind of my dad's biology lab, and you'd be surprised how much of the kind of day-to-day work of setting up experiments and stuff is kind of, hacker stuff. Like, my dad had one tech who was just incredibly creative. Like, he was totally, I'm sure he's a Hackaday reader. He was totally like jury rigging all of these crazy apparatuses to kind of streamline their work or get something done that they couldn't do, or have the experiment run unsupervised without somebody having to come in and pipette it manually all the darn time. And so this sort of thing, I think, goes on a lot more in hard science. And we actually saw another article recently, I'll have to throw the links into the show notes for you, that was written by a professor who's been using a bunch of Blu-ray disc mechanisms to do some pretty crazy atomic force microscopy and other stuff. And he put out a call for other people who are interested in making kind of open source biological apparatus using consumer gear like this. And so it's a really cool application realm, I guess, for kind of the hacking toolkits that we all have.
If there's one, I don't know if I'd call it a criticism of this setup. I did think it was interesting in the comments. Somebody said, are you training a rat to play Doom, or are you training a rat to run in a straight line?
Yeah.
Because they just have to go in a straight line, and then boom, they're at the end of the map. So I think somebody said, if you turn the monitor off, would the rat do the same thing? And that's kind of an interesting point, but I imagine that's something they're working on, more complicated maps and that sort of thing. Because it is sort of just a running in a straight line simulator right now.
If you read the proposal for this, they're talking about exactly that. And Victor's like, he wants the rat to be able to shoot when it comes up to its opponent. They put one of those fireball throwing guys up there. What are they even?
Imp.
The scary hairy ones. Brown, ugly, hairy ones. Imps.
Imps, right? Yeah.
Imp. Okay, cool.
Yeah, imps. I'm pretty sure.
I don't know what they're called. I just know to run away.
It's not the flying tomatoes, right? Those are
exactly.
It's a demon thing.
I just know to dodge their fireballs. Anyway, the rat's supposed to shoot the thing. He couldn't manage to train the rats reliably to shoot them using this rearing gesture. Like, they were supposed to stand up on their rear feet, and the training machine was supposed to like lift them up to have them do that. And that didn't quite work out. And it is just one-dimensional, like you say, instead of two-dimensional. And I think it's more just kind of a proof of concept, and certainly teaches them to play Doom is a far, far, far stretch. But teaches them to run forward using an automatic training system. If you could train rats without human intervention, I think it's totally worth it.
So this next project is about 6 years in the making, because that's when Brendan Slight started work on lasercut.scad, which is an OpenSCAD library for laser cutting, right? He saw that we had been running some OpenSCAD stories recently, and he thought it was time to chime in with his own personal project, and we're very glad that he did, because instead of being the usual, designing parts for 3D printing, his library allows you to create two-dimensional DXF files that you could feed to a laser cutter, but also pretty much anything that can follow a file, whether it's CNC, router. It talks about vinyl cutters. There's a parametric value in there where you can set how wide of a bite your tool of choice will take, so you can kind of tweak it to whatever machine you have. And it's just a really cool library that recreates all of those neat little laser cutting tricks that you've seen. Have you ever put together one of those laser cut birch 3D printers or something like that? You've seen those finger joints, you've seen the captive nut thing. And this makes all that super easy to do, functions for all that kind of thing. And beyond, too. There's some really wild, like twist joinery going on where you can put one piece in and rotate it 90 degrees and that locks it together. He's got another one, I think it's just called Clip, and it's more for acrylics, but it has a little springy arm that you push into a square opening on the other side and it locks in, but you can undo it with no fastener. There's a lot of cool stuff in there, and it's almost surprising. When he sent it in, my first reaction was to search. Like, we must have covered this, right? It's just, he's been working on it for 6 years, but no. So this has kind of been under the radar for a long time, and it's a great reminder that if you're working on something, you just let us know.
Right?
We didn't have to wait 6 years to run it. Like, we would have been happy to have run it 3 years ago or whatever. It's a great project. He has a couple people have contributed to. It's not a complete solo thing. And it deserves the praise, deserves the eyeballs. So we were really glad to see it come in the tip line, and it's just a good reminder that don't be shy. You can definitely send in your own stuff.
Everybody has their own take on this one, and I was using one recently to do laser cut boxes called boxes.py. I'll throw a link into that. It makes the G-code directly out of Python. One thing it doesn't do that this lasercut.scad does beautifully is lay the individual parts out on like an XY grid for you. You can imagine all the different parts you need for the box laid out in a big line. It's going to be a really long line, and chances are your plywood isn't shaped like that. It's got a flag in the code that then pulls those apart and packs them into kind of a square shape, which is probably a lot more like what your cutting stock looks like. It's a really cool, very refined library in that sense, in that it's clearly been informed by a lot of back and forthing and using it. And, you type in the box you need, you hit enter. If you know what your kerf is, it gives you the file you need. Like, you can't beat that.
Hey, that's a good point too about the automatic layout thing. I remember not long ago I forget what the site was, but it's one of the things you can upload, the file, and they'll laser cut it and give you an estimate or whatever. And it kept on choking on the file I was giving it because it was like that first example was just this big long linear thing, and it was like, no, I don't understand that. It wanted to see it in this kind of condensed, packed thing. So like right off the bat, that's a huge advantage if it makes it easier for you to be able to send the files off for manufacturing.
All right, my last big hack this week is the 3-cent motor controller. And this is a project using one of those little super tiny, super cheap PADAUK microcontrollers for something actually useful. And that is part of what I think is lovely about this. Ben Lim has taken it on himself to use one of these tiny little one-time flash microcontrollers to drive some salvaged motors with encoders on them that he got from an inkjet printer to turn it into a nicely servo-controlled motor. And that is actually the other half of the story here. Looking at his code examples and how he's able to use this, frankly, too small, too cheap microcontroller to nonetheless do something useful really gives you an idea of why you might want something like this that just doesn't have all that much flash. It can do one thing. But in the case of driving a little motor and counting pulses on a quadrature encoder, it only needs to do one thing. And so it's actually a perfect fit here. But the other nice part of this is him taking apart one of these motors from an inkjet printer. If you haven't taken an inkjet printer apart, you absolutely should. It's surprising how little precision there is in there in a way for something that can print 900 dpi or 1200 dpi. I mean, the dots are very accurately positioned for something that has just kind of a crappy DC motor driving it. And the secret, of course, is this high-resolution encoder wheel that it has on it, and maybe some gearing that lets it know exactly where the head is. Even though it can't position it well, it knows right where it is, so it knows when to squirt the ink out. And that's the secret, and that's kind of what he's using here to turn this into a sweet little servo motor. He's got a weird encoder motor here. I've never seen one of these. Most of them that I've seen have like it looks like it's a photolithography made disc with a bunch of like black lines and then transparent bits in it. This one, he's actually got some kind of a molded encoder wheel that looks like it's kind of like a knurled knob or something. And the little prisms that the outside of the plastic make bend the light differently. And so that's the way the encoder works. That's kind of cool. But the rest of it is just a dissection of this motor, figuring out how the encoder works, and then writing the code on one of these tiny little microcontrollers to make it run.
Well, it's funny you say that about the encoder side of it, because I thought the same thing too, but in a totally different direction. The printers that I've taken apart usually have like a big linear thing like that. So I basically take that little wheel off and unroll it into a straight line, and then the reader kind of rides on the, so the encoder isn't on the motor itself. This is way more useful because it's a one-piece deal. Like the ones I've seen are separate. You can't easily repurpose it.
An encoder strip that runs the whole way across the bed. Yeah, I've seen those too.
Yeah, which are you're kind of beat. It's kind of you can't take that out and do anything else with. This is much more advantageous for us, the garbage pickers.
I've always wanted to hack one of those onto a 3D printer, so that the 3D printer has that kind of resolution and not just the micro steps of a stepper motor. But then again, good micro stepper drivers these days, there's nothing to gain from doing it.
I'm pretty sure we've even seen people try to do that like closed looped 3D printer thing. But like you said, with the improvements to stepper drivers, other than picking up on crash detection and stuff like that, it's not really worth the effort. But no, it's really cool to see this project. We've done a bunch of stuff with these little 3-cent microcontrollers, and more examples of practical applications for them are always very helpful. Of course, in the comments, people are like, "Oh, they're not 3 cents anymore." Like, all right, well,
they're 9 cents now, man.
Yeah, seriously. But nothing is the price it was before. Everything is going up, but it's still pretty cheap. Even if you're paying 10 or heaven forbid 15 cents a chip, you'll still be okay. Of course, people go into there are problems, in terms of software, getting actual code on them and stuff. But the more practical examples, the better. It definitely makes me want to crack one of these things out and try to make it do something.
Ben, in his write-up here, makes the case that the software toolchain is all open source for these. And, you kind of have to buy into their compiler and stuff like that. But it's really not all that bad. And from looking at his code, if you've written code for any other microcontroller, you can crack this. It is not a problem. Right. I mean, they are also one-time flash, so you don't want to do what I do when you're writing code, which is flash it, see if it works, fix it, flash it, see if it works, fix it, flash it, see if it works. I mean, it makes you think a little bit more about your code before you write it up. But on the other hand, 3 cents, 9 cents, how much more is it going to make you think about your code?
And that's definitely the way I do it too. I like, got to change this. Got to change this. Got to change this. I spend as much time waiting for a thing to flash as I do writing the code.
Exactly. This code might work.
Yeah. Oh, that didn't work? But like you said, even if you had a box of these things. But hey, if it gets you to write more efficient code and be more confident, I suppose that's worth it too. One of my favorites this week is taking water cooler UX into your own hands with Ghidra. Like the title would make you think, right? It's about changing the user interface on a water cooler, water dispenser. But that's really just the tip of the iceberg. This is a phenomenal write-up that kind of runs from being a little bit of a teardown, a little bit of a tutorial on how you pull firmware and patch it. I mean, this is like, talk about like a tour de force kind of thing. I think one of the first comments was like, these are my favorite Hackaday posts, and I'm kind of inclined to agree because there's just so much to learn from this. If you read this thing and you're not inspired to take something apart and try to modify its firmware, you might be on the wrong website. website, honestly, because like Robbie Dirks, he makes it so approachable, I guess, for lack of a better word, right? I mean, he kind of breaks it, and it's not that it's a tutorial per se, but he just breaks it down step by step. And even if you haven't used a lot of these tools before, it just makes it seem like it all just clicks. You're like, oh, okay, I get it. You understand everything from decompiling the firmware into figuring out how to get your own code on it. And in the end, it's interesting. He changes it so like you can hit 2 buttons to get a pre-measured water dispenser thing. And there's some people who would have said, screw it, I'll just replace the whole controller with like an ESP or something. And you could definitely do that. You could definitely. You can figure out how to tap into the little pump controllers, and you know what? Honestly, it might be faster too. Depending on where your skills are. But I just really appreciate this approach. It's so clean, it's so elegant, and you learn so much more doing it this way. So it might not be for everyone. It might not even be for me, to be perfectly honest with you. But I really respect how much work went into this, and then how detailed the documentation is for it too.
Yeah, and this is the sort of thing that, maybe you don't need to train a water dispenser to dispense exactly the amount to fit into your thermos, right? Like, that's kind of a niche case, but that's kind of what this is for. But your point that it's also maybe just, finger exercises along the way to practice working on something else is probably also right. You could have done this on your own microcontroller yourself from scratch, and it probably would have been easier. But would you have learned as much? No.
Right.
If we read the article where it's just like, I gutted it and put a better micro in there, we would have thought that's pretty cool too, actually. Like, I would have written that up.
Yeah, sure.
But it would have been a different kind of hack. It would have been a different lesson. And this one, you learn something about reverse engineering, and that's applicable in a lot of ways to so many other commercial products you might want to take on.
Yeah, you're going to see the same. It's a little bit like router hacking. We've covered a lot of people finding root on their router and modifying the firmware. And you might think, oh, once you've seen one, you've seen it all. But I mean, that's kind of the point, right? Like there is so many similar design decisions out there that, this kind of reinforces it. Like, you look at these consumer things, and I mean, let's be realistic. The people making these things are just as lazy as we are. Right. So they're gonna reuse the same tricks, and they're gonna see, I don't know how to do that. Well, how'd the other guy do it? So these are just great examples of the kind of things that you could run into messing around inside a consumer product. So it's like we're talking about with the 3-cent microcontroller. Every time you have one of these examples that people can look at, it makes it more likely that it'll spawn a new project, and that's kind of what it's all about in the end.
Yeah, and I don't know how many of us kind of slightly older hackers didn't get our start working on those routers that you were talking about. I mean, mine's still running in the corner over there, actually, believe it or not. It must be 15 years old by now. But that sort of experience brings a lot of people into it, and I think that's totally useful. And then, like you say, they're all the same at some level, and so it's just, stepping stones up to the next device and go, go, go. All right, starting off the quick hacks this week is Rutz 4.0's maximum throughput benchy. This is kind of a cheeky take on a speedboat benchy project. How many of those little 3D calibration prints can you print per hour? And he does it, instead of printing them serially, he prints them in parallel using a 5x5 array of nozzles to print 25 benchies at once on the same build plate. What's interesting about this is it doesn't make the control problem any harder. It's just a single plate with 25 nozzles in it moving around. So it's basically a regular old 3D printer just printing 25 things out. I think that trick may be useful if you want to print out replicates of something else. So maybe 2 nozzles that move in parallel like that. Next up, 8 bits in a byte with a video, a label maker that uses AI really poorly. This is a Raspberry Pi, a camera, a thermal printer in a cardboard box with a button. It's connected to Deep AI, and so it takes a picture, figures out what deep AI thinks is in the image and then prints out a label for you. Of course, nothing works right, and the video is marvelous. Spoilers, it thinks an apple is a person's head, and it thinks itself in a mirror is a white wall. I love this because when our own Steve Dufresne did a similar project a long time ago, it pointed at him and it said he was a tobacconist. And I thought that was so bizarrely specific at the same time as being wrong. And this video has a little bit of that same flair to it. Tobacconist. I don't even know what that is.
I'd love to see the model that was trained on.
Dear sir, that's a tobacconist. Anyway, sorry. Next up, OpenCV knows where your hand is. This is one video out of many in a series about using OpenCV by Murtaza. In this particular one, it uses the size of your hand in front of the camera to figure out how far away it is. And he sets up a simple game of press the button. So when your hand is in the right place and the right distance from the screen, you win a point. That's not the point. The point is this video and the rest of his series of videos will help demystify OpenCV and computer vision for you if you want to head down that particular rabbit hole. And finally, this is the future, folks. BrainLab is Google Earth, but for Drosophila fly's brain. This is a write-up of the Fly EM project, which is a project to figure out essentially the net list for a fruit fly's brain. This has the connection diagram of all of the nerves inside a fruit fly brain to each other. And you can look at it online and download it and use it to make your own machines out of. I'm waiting for someone to make custom fruit fly brain silicon based on this. And when you do, submit it to tips. The future is weird.
My first quick hack is Matrix Digital Rain on the IBM PC with a high persistence monitor. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a new Matrix movie out. So we're seeing a lot of digital rain projects, which is the little green text that ran down the screen. In this case, it's being run on a IBM PC 5150, and it's era appropriate monitor. And what that gives you is a really cool phosphor persistence of vision effect, which is probably actually a lot closer to what they were shooting for in the original VFX than what we see now when we try to run the same effect on a modern LCD. Next up is the cucumber house that Lego built. This is a incredibly complex Lego contraption that uses cucumbers in place of timber, with the end result being a little log cabin made out of cucumbers. I don't know why this was done. It says it took 83 days to complete it. I believe it. It's amazing to watch it in motion. It's an incredible triumph of engineering, and in the end you can eat it. So what more could you ask for? And my last one is Teensy 4 pushed to the limit with 1 gigahertz overclock. Pretty straightforward. Take the Teensy 4.1, which is already a pretty serious microcontroller, and push it past its stock 600 megahertz to first they do 800, then they do gigahertz. The most interesting part with this one was seeing a old laptop cooler bolted to the top of the Teensy to keep the temperatures in check, and it does a really good job. So assuming you don't have a problem adding some additional cooling to the microcontroller, it can get some real computational work done with just a software switch in the IDE.
All right, and that brings us to our Can't Miss articles. These are original content written by our fantastic Hackaday writers. And first up, I have Tom Nardi's 2021 As the Hackaday World Turns. And Tom's been writing up a kind of end-of-the-year retrospective for a few years running right now, and it's always a pleasure to see what he thinks have been the cool and interesting trends of the year. And I have to say, I think one of the ones that you mentioned this year was a little bit controversial to me in a way because it was a new part. It was the Raspberry Pi Pico, the RP2040 chip on it as well in particular. And I think that's a little bit of a weird choice. But on the other hand, it's a weird microcontroller, and we've seen people start using it in weird and appropriate ways. And I got an early hands-on when it just came out and started playing around with it. And the programmable I/O, the like low-level hardware interfacing bit, struck me as being really one of the coolest things. But then they also did a bunch of other kind of idiosyncratic design choices, like they rearranged the memory mapped registers in a way that is kind of orthogonal to the way you're used to thinking of it. And there's some weird choices like that probably only 1% of the community cares about because everyone's using some abstraction layer library up on top of that, but is also kind of, I don't know what, represents this kind of clean slate thinking they must have had when they were making this thing, because they took some weird choices and some interesting choices. And I think it's kind of cool to see, frankly, compared to the big microcontroller manufacturers, a niche player like Raspberry Pi throw their hat into this game with something kind of off the beaten path like this.
The goal was certainly to shake things up. Like you said, a clean slate kind of approach. And it was really cool to see how quickly a lot of people latched onto that. Once they were available in single quantities. When I was doing like the links, when Jenny wrote up the thing that says, okay, they're now available in single quantities, that was like June. And then by July, we already started seeing people put them to work. And not like a hello world thing. Like they were really putting them to work, and they were really kind of, squeezing what they could out of it. I think one of the first ones was somebody was using it to basically make like a Game Boy cartridge. Right. And they were, talking to all the pins with it. So I think there was definitely a demand for it, and the name, right? The Raspberry Pi name certainly helps.
Yeah, of course.
Would it have been so successful if it was some nobody? Who could say? But it was a pretty big deal. I think a lot of it though is because you can buy the actual chip.
That's right,
and not just the individuals. I mean, other companies too, because you already saw Adafruit and Seed and all these other companies. It wasn't like the Pi proper where there's just one Raspberry Pi, right? Like the actual chip itself is showing up all over the place. So I think it's definitely an interesting move for them. Great for us, right? It just gives us more interesting hardware, gives us powerful stuff to work with. So it was a win-win. When I do these year-end reviews, it's a good excuse to look at the numbers, right? I go into the analytics and I see like what was the most popular stuff over the last 12 months, and you see kind of trends appear in what was the most read or most discussed, and it's interesting for maybe as long as I've been doing this. Some of the most popular stuff is space related. I think there's a lot of crossover, with people making stuff and people wishing they could make something that goes to space, right? So, we've been doing a lot of that stuff, and that's, kind of why I led with like the James Webb. But I mean, that could have been a whole article of all the space stuff that happened in this year that were very, very popular articles, got a lot of comments. But one of the trends that was a little bit new, I thought, was we did a lot of repairs, a lot of repair stories, which are always cool. And frankly, we don't see a whole lot of them on average. It was a noticeable uptick this year. And I kind of in the article I say, is it because parts are more expensive and people are trying to work with what they have? Is it just because they're still stuck in the house because of the pandemic? For whatever reason, it seemed like this year, even more so than last year, people were fixing stuff. They were taking the time to take stuff apart and documenting it too, which is really cool. So I was glad to see that. We're always obviously real big on right to repair, and it doesn't have to be. I think I said that in there. It doesn't have to be a John Deere tractor, right?
Right.
You should be able to fix anything, really.
Your coffee machine.
Yeah. And that kind of plays right into what another very popular theme was, for better or for worse, in 2021, which was manufacturers having a very creepy amount of control over the stuff we own. We talked about Samsung, bricking TVs that they thought were stolen. Okay, fine. You could say, well, sure, they were stolen TVs, but it becomes kind of a gray area when the manufacturer is, judge, jury, and executioner for these kind of things. Like, who, did someone tell them they were allowed to do this, or did they just say, hey? And then, Cricket tried to do the subscription thing, and that went very poorly for them, and they backpedaled. But there were just, a lot of stories almost every month with some story where a manufacturer was trying to do something that we didn't like. Yeah. And, it's an unfortunate reality about hooking everything up to the internet. But, it's also, again, proof like why we need to have the right for repair. And we need to have these abilities to work on our own things. Because, obviously, if the manufacturer can, just turn our stuff off remotely, we need to have some kind of defense against that. And that's the manufacturers would love it if we can't open anything, we can't mess with it. It's all remotely controlled. But that's a horrible future for us.
If I can add a silver lining to your dark cloud here, I think we've also seen a lot of pushback, not just from hacker types, but from your straight up normal Joe consumer, saying, look, I don't want this on my device. And, I think the Cricket one was a case where, like, a whole bunch of scrapbookers were like, you can't take this new ability away from us. And when the company backs down in the face of that, that's awesome. And Lewin Day just wrote an article about car functionality as a service. And one of the kind of poster children of how that could go wrong was a Toyota key fob that gives you remote access to your car. And that is part of a service that you may soon have to pay for. And of course, there was a huge public outcry about this. And now Toyota is maybe walking it back. The kind of good news here is that although the companies seem to be trying this kind of crap, people pushing back on them seems to make them readjust and maybe take a softer stance. Of course, they will always be trying to get more money out of you. And in these particular cases, I think people misperceive small recurring fees as being less than they are once they're aggregated up over the lifetime of a device.
Oh, sure.
And the companies are somewhat cynically trying to use this failure in our own psychology to do the long run calculation to get more money out of us. And that, I'm like trained as an economist, and that's a little bit appalling to me for them to be using this kind of informational asymmetry against us. That's not fair, people. And so it's really nice to see this kind of backlash happening directly against companies that try to do this sort of thing where it's not part of the deal up front. And I think that's good news. And as you say, of course, in the end, if the companies don't back down, it's really nice if you have a bunch of people who know how to reverse engineer these machines and be able to take them back.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's getting it out there and talking about it and being vocal. It's Hackaday, right? So you would think these stories all had somebody who then figured out how to undo what the manufacturer was doing. But in most cases, it wasn't about that. It was just, we were bringing the news to it. People started commenting on it. You get hundreds of comments. People shared a thing. There was no hack involved. It was just bringing to light what these companies were trying to do. And in many cases, that's enough. Just shine a light on it. Don't let them get away with it. Be vocal. Even if you don't know anything about opening devices and messing with firmware, just, share stories like this.
Talk to your friends if you think it's wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, you tell people, say, I don't like this, and here's why, and there is a lot of power, and people, we forget sometimes, but the power is really with us. Like, we're the people buying these things. We're the, they say vote with your wallet or whatever. We forget, and these were stories. While I would have rathered we didn't have to run them, the kind of the silver lining is at least they were put out there. They were super popular, and like I said, in the case of the Cricket, maybe we were able to to do a little good there. If we could be part of that, I think that's I'm proud that we were able to get these stories out there and make sure they're not hidden in some little Friday night news release that nobody ever reads.
Oh, you know what? Something horrible just occurred to me, and that is I realized what you forgot in this write-up.
Oh no,
2021, and you of all people. 2021 was absolutely the year of the cyberdeck. Tom Nardi.
Yeah. We did see a lot of that, but I think I might have put that in the last one too.
Did you? Was 2020 the year of the cyber?
Yeah,
okay, I'll give you.
Now that I think about it,
I'll give you that if you look back, if you put yourself in the shoes of 2020, it looked like that was the year of the cyberdeck. But I will say we saw an absolute flourishing of projects this year. And if 2 years ago, if 2020 was maybe the beginning of a movement, 2021 was definitely where it stood up and started running.
I've been threatening to write this for probably as long as we've been writing about cybernetics, but I mean, I think it's a much bigger thing than just, I want to make some little sci-fi looking prop. It is really people who want what they want, a computing device that is completely their own. They want to know that they can update it. They want to know that they can do maintenance. They want to, they don't want to have to search around for some schematic, because guess what? They made the schematic. It's really about a truly personal computer. It just so happens a lot of them look like movie props, but that's kind of a secondary thing. Like that's just kind of like the hacker aesthetic, right? But
that's just life imitates art,
But we see the same thing with the whole concept of doing the modular phones and the modular laptops. I mean, this is something that people want. They want a computing device that is not disposable and that they can work on over time. So I just think the cyberdeck movement, I think, is just kind of the tip of the iceberg, really.
Yeah, it's just the same kind of people want to own their own hardware.
Right.
And that's the same as the right to repair stuff, and the same as the hackability stuff, and the same as the reverse engineering stuff, and the same as the do-it-yourself, build your own cyberdeck stuff. It's really interesting. I see it. I think that's the big trend of 2021.
The hardware that you own, you actually own. What a crazy concept. So my pick for Can't Miss is Maya's Painted Over But Not Forgotten, Restoring Lost Paintings with Radiation and Mathematics. This is a fantastic look at like the cutting edge of, not restoration in maybe the classic sense, but being able to look into a painting and literally peeling it back using like X-ray and infrared and all kinds of technology. Some of the examples given in this article are sort of mundane, I guess, for lack of a better word. They'd have a painting and you say a family portrait, and okay, well, you have new kids, so you got to add the kids to it, right? And there's another example where a family, one of the daughters became a nun, so they wanted to put her in a little bit more appropriate clothing. And, in ye old Photoshop, someone had to go and touch up an actual painting, right? So, new paint goes on the old paint and they build up these layers. And using these modern techniques, you can see the layers in terms of depth, but also because we know what the pigments were made out of in terms of their makeup, you can actually see what colors they were, because you can say, oh, okay, there's so much lead, so much chromium, whatever. So they can actually get a color recreation of what the different layers of painting looks like. And it's almost like traveling through time in a way, because you can see how, a family changed over the years. And there's obvious, historical and genealogical advantages to that. Maya goes on to give another really interesting example where a painting kind of disappeared, created in the 20s. By 32, it was gone, and nobody knew where this painting went. And then they started looking at other works from the artist, and come to find out that because he had fallen on some hard times financially, he cut that original canvas up and used it to paint new paintings. So they were able to see, it was almost like a little jigsaw puzzle. They were able to see sections of that original painting under the paint of several other paintings, and then they were able to recreate that. And obviously the painting itself is lost. You can't do anything about that. But they were able to put it back together and down to the brush strokes and the color, and make a new facsimile of what was a lost piece of art. So it's pretty amazing what they can do kind of goes into, we've talked about it before a little bit, is AI, if you have AI create a Beethoven symphony, is it, is it really Beethoven? But, it's the best we could do, right? Like these paintings otherwise would be completely gone. Nobody could see them. So at least with this kind of technology, a facsimile can be created, or, you can see it, on your computer, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I thought some of the tech in this one was actually really interesting. Maya went into the computed laminography scanning, which is basically like a CT scan, like a computed tomography scan, which you can get done on you with X-rays. They basically take X-rays from a whole bunch of different angles and piece this together into a 3D model. They want to do the same sort of thing with these paintings too. What's interesting here, and that what I didn't realize until reading this article, is that that's a real problem because the surface is flat, right? Like, so if you imagine spinning an X-ray machine around you, you're kind of a cylinder of meat and bone, right? It's real easy to go around you. How do you go around something that's basically two-dimensional like that? And one of the answers is they use a reflective X-ray diffraction and a very precise machine to kind of scan over the surface and go around taking pictures from different rotational angles around it to get the idea of the 3D stack up there. The kind of problems there are it has to be super precise, and it has to be, it's a moving a machine around in 3 dimensions problem, which has a lot in common with like 3D printers or something. So on one hand, it's kind of this cutting edge technology in the restoration field, and on the other, it's kind of a little bit closer to sort of things that we're doing, playing around with high precision positioning machines like that. So it's really kind of fun to read.
Not a surprise for Maya, but she does a phenomenal job of really digging into the technical detail. Even if you are, let's say, not an artistic person, let's say, right? A day at the art museum is not your ideal activity. You're going to find this interesting just from the technical standpoint. And, she's linking into the white papers and really deep diving on this technology. I'll admit, I was initially brought in because I've fallen down the occasional YouTube rabbit hole on like painting restorations. You got one shot at this and you can't screw it up, and you got to, use your kind of collected knowledge to do the best you can to repair this weird once in a lifetime damage. It is nice to kind of see that these techniques on the whole, are non-invasive too, which is also very important. It seems like, not to say a lot of skill isn't involved in pulling it off, of course, but I thought it was interesting in the one picture, it appears that they're scanning the thing while it's still on the wall in the museum, which is really wild.
Oh, right.
Like they rolled this machine up to it, and talk about, you don't want to disturb it or anything. It's literally on the wall on display, and they can just scan it and look into it. I mean, it's wild stuff, and you can't help but wonder what kind of hidden mysteries are waiting for us now that we can look back and see what's under some of these famous works.
That brings us to the end of this week's Hackaday podcast. As always, if you have feedback for us, you can write us, editor@hackaday.com. You can head over to the podcast website, hackaday.com/podcast. Leave your comments and read all of the links we have. We love your tips. Send them into the tips line, tips@hackaday.com. And until next week,
keep on hacking.
You're a managing editor now. You have to say keep on hacking.
It's in the job description.
Man, I've forgotten how to do this.
2 weeks is all it takes.
I'm going to get cute and get out is what I'm going to do.
Rules to live by. Escape quickly as possible.